Welcome to Spirits Podcast, a boozy dive into mythology, legends, and folklore. Every week, we pour a drink and learn about a new story from around the world. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Julia.
And we are so excited to be joined at long last from tomorrow and from about halfway around the world, the feminist anthropologist and author of Witch Power. It's Emma Quilty.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It is our pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. A little peek behind the curtain. We've been trying to have Emma on for almost a year now. It's getting close, and you have been very busy. We have been very busy. So it is finally wonderful to get to sit down and have this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's fantastic timing. You know, it's the new year, new world, new politics. We've got lots of things to talk about and unpack.
Yes, and there is a lot to unpack with you and with Witch Power, hexing the patriarchy with feminist magic. Before we get started, Emma, can you tell the audience a little bit about you and your work and what you do?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm a feminist anthropologist, which means that the type of social scientist I am, I always come at it with a feminist and critical queer lens, which is not generally found in anthropology, but there is a sort of new wave of scholars and scholarship that is sort of breaking through, which is fantastic to be a part of that. The book that I've written, Witch Power, is an academic trade book, trying something new, not locking up research and social theories in the academy. I've written it to be really accessible and interesting to sort of general audience interested in feminist literature, but also to witches themselves. I know as a young witch, I liked reading about witches in the world, not just practicing, but research, social research about witches. So that's the type of scholar that I am.
That's also the correct audience for both us and for your book is listening to this podcast right now. So if you haven't already stopped the recording to go and buy Witch Power, you absolutely should.
Now's the time. Make the library buy it if you can.
So I think the first question I sort of want to ask is a big question, but I think it'll sort of segue us into a lot of the conversation that I want to have and also is extremely relevant to your research, which is as both a practicing witch and as someone who does a lot of research into the history of witches and witchcraft and how that is practiced. How do you think the modern day witch differs from witches of the past?
Ooh, that's a great question.
The big one, I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think about the contemporary witch now through sort of a digital ethnographic lens, right? So I think about witches on your side of the world and my side of the world sort of gazing through social media and consuming the politics of today, but also the world of the witch through social media, through Instagram, through TikTok, through all these sort of visual mediums. So I think about comparing the witches of today with, say, the witches of the 60s and 70s who are coming up in the sort of major social movements of those times. And what I'm noticing now is this incredible critical discourse amongst witches online about political activism and how we can no longer, as a community, if we wanted to sort of group everyone together, hide behind language around like love and light and, oh, I don't want to engage with that because it's not on, you know, the right vibration, or, you know, if you consume too much, it's not. No, we need to be actively engaging in the events of the world and what is around us and to be protecting each other. We are not individual witches floating around. We are part of our communities, our societies, and we need to be politically and socially active. So that's sort of what I've been thinking about very recently, but also through the research and through the book.
Incredible. This is a complete aside, but asking that question did remind me, and your answer reminded me of an article that I think I saw like yesterday or 2 days ago, which is how Etsy is now banned spell casting and witches from its platform.
There's, you know, a huge conversation. I have a whole chapter on consumerism and witchcraft and the commodification of things like energy work and spell work and hexes. And I think there's nothing inherently wrong with thinking about witchcraft as something that is transactional, sort of that mythos. We're on the mythology podcast, of course. That mythos of the witch, the healer, the wise woman, going to her, trading with her, in whatever shape, way or form, money or labor or a favor for some kind of service, right? To hex a violent husband, to get rid of an unwanted pregnancy, to heal sickness, for whatever sort of purpose. But when we put over that relationship a sort of critical capitalist lens, we sort of start to unpack what can go wrong in that situation. So when you put things like hexes or spell work onto platforms like Etsy that are essentially extractive and designed to screw over artists and content creators, I'm not surprised that Etsy did that. It's essentially avoiding. So I'm not sure what I can, what names I can or cannot drop, but
go for it.
Obviously, the whole hex on Charlie Kirk, Jezebel situation, and then having to redact, and something that was essentially just playful. I can't imagine being in that editorial meeting and being like, oh shit. So that was really interesting, sitting here in Australia and watching that sort of unfold again online, where these issues and these events are being mediated is through this sort of lens. So we're only being fed a part of the picture. But I'm really not surprised that Etsy has gone ahead and banned it. But that's not stopping people from doing this sort of work on Instagram, as they should be able to. That's part of their practice. That's part of their business model.
Yeah.
But then, opens the door for people to be scammed in lots of different ways. We're seeing, different, I don't want to drop the AI bomb too soon, but
listen, it's something we're always going to talk about. So you can drop it whenever you need to drop it.
So tired of talking about it. But in the context of witchcraft, the community is going to engage with it in some way, shape or form, whether that's, critically and denying it and pushing back, or by embracing it, right? Which has its own sort of complexities and politics.
One thing, Emma, that I really appreciate about how you tackled writing a book about witchcraft and witches is that contextualizing and taking seriously modern witches, and not just witches as like a way that society viewed women who were different in the past. Which I think, there's certainly kernels of truth there and like building blocks. But I feel like for me, one of the things that history books taught me is that witchcraft was a moral panic, or witchcraft was like a way to kind of other women who, for whatever reason, were kind of excluded from society in the past. And now, maybe folks have some kind of like reclaiming or affiliation with that word. But I would love to invite you to just use this time to talk about the vibrant reality of contemporary witchcraft and witch communities and solo practitioners today, because I love that witches have always been here and will always be here and are both part of our history, part of our present, and part of our future.
I love the threads that you've picked up on in the book. The whole reclaiming project is constantly ongoing, right? Reclaiming queer, reclaiming fag, reclaiming gay. These are not pejoratives that have been completely won over. They are still used to discriminate, to harm, to other. And so the words witch, witches, witchcraft, witch hunt are still highly politicized. They're still used, they're still weaponized. So like a really recent example, Francesca Albanese was in a United Nations meeting and she was accused by the Israeli correspondent of being a witch, to which she, I'm going to paraphrase here, but I think she responded, I'm not a witch, but if I could cast spells, I would try and stop what you were doing. It wouldn't be to harm. And here home in Australia, we have had one woman as Prime Minister, and she was very famously referred to as a bitch and a witch. There were placards that were held up that the opposition leader stood beside and was seen taking photos with. And I know that Trump tweeted witch hunt sort of hundreds of times during his first presidency. So the term witch and witch hunts are so politically powerful, and they're also culturally contextual, right? So something I really try to elaborate in the book is that witch hunts and accusations of witchcraft are not a historical chapter of human history. It's not a closed practice to accuse someone of a witch, to harm them for being a witch, to exile them from a community, and to physically torture, hurt, rape, or to murder them. These are practices that happen in the world and have continued to happen. So we like to sort of keep the 15th and 16th century as this almost like clinical, hysterical, oh, they didn't know any better, they weren't washing their hands, we didn't, it was part of the feudal transfer
They didn't even know about germs. How could they know about, feminism?
Yeah, they were just, it was just a moral panic. And it's like, yeah, no, this is a consistent practice of both patriarchy and misogyny. And in the book, I use Kate Mann's framework of patriarchy and misogyny, where patriarchy is the ideology, like white supremacy, that places men, particularly white men, above women and girls. And misogyny is the sort of the police arm in Australia that is the literal state violence, and in the US, the police and ICE agents physically handing out that punishment. But it requires both, right? It needs to operate at both of those levels. It needs to be there in terms of ideology, but also in terms of enforcement.
I'm curious too, because you mentioned gender violence, and I know that you also touch on queerness and like gendered queerness in the book as well, and how that relates to witchcraft. Can you speak more on that, especially like in terms of like navigating identity and how gender queerness, transness, and like non-binary roles sort of fit into what the modern witchcraft looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I actually expand on in a separate book chapter in another book called The Witch Studies Reader. So that edited collection is like sort of more academic focused. But if anyone would like to read that particular chapter and it's behind a paywall, please just email me and I will send you a PDF.
Scholars are so good at that. I love that.
They really are. They're like, you want to read my thing? Yes.
I will send it to you. Don't worry about postage. Like, let me take care of that. Generosity in the academy, I think, is rare and needs to be fostered. But going back to your question about queerness and the witch, I think there's a really natural marriage between the two things. And that is not to say that there are not large sections and traditions of witchcraft that really lean into a more hegemonic masculine binary of women and men. And that's part of their sort of symbols and rituals. And I sort of unpack that in the book as well. But there's one particular tradition in witchcraft that I research and I talk about in the book called the reclaiming tradition that originated in California, of course. And that particular tradition has always been very eco-activist and has been part of a civil rights movement, and it has always been politicized and has always been wrapped up in the gay rights movement. And so queerness and political activism have always been sort of intertwined with those rituals. They're not sort of separate from each other. And that became very clear to me at one of the rituals that I was at, where we were tearing apart an effigy and screaming out the things that we wanted to throw into the fire. And I think from memory, it was like nuclear warfare, animal testing, homophobia, just these incredible things that I just would not have expected necessarily when I went into the field. And yeah, for me, so I obviously, you're both familiar with the book, so you know that I write the book from a first-person perspective and as a queer woman and as someone sort of grappling with constant racial identity politics in Australia. The witch became a sort of natural home for me because she is, for me, not a sort of boundary object of in or out. She is this sort of liminal space. She is the excess that is queerness. So for queer not necessarily being always the opposite, the antithetical, she is sort of everything. I realize that is vague, but trying to define queer when queerness defies being defined.
Yes.
It's messy. Yeah.
It's all encompassing.
Yeah. It's me. It's everything.
Yeah.
If I could quote you to you for a second, a thing I love to do with published authors on the show. So on in at least page 9 of the proof, you write, quote, "The witch is still part of society because she herself is a boundary object. The witch is the line women cannot cross lest they be rejected by their own society." And I read and implied, I wrapped the witch in the word queer because I think, of course, they're inherently put together, but that so describes at least my experience of being queer, which is that I am not just the other that people point to and say, well, you don't want to be like that, because my identity is part of society as well. And I think you do a great job of just saying, even in that line, and then obviously expanding on the ideas later in the book, that like the people that mainstream society or oppressive ideologies use and instrumentalize make those individuals part of their system as well. And we are in relation. We are in a relationship. There's almost like no more intimate of a relationship than like a hater and the object of their hate. Like, if, to kind of reduce it into internet words, like why you're so obsessed with me is often what we come down to when talking about so many of these moral panics about queer and trans folks and women and witches and sex and all of the topics that, for me, make life worth living.
It's still so wild to me when people quote my book, either verbally or in they show me like, oh, I just quoted you in this document, and this. It's still wild to me the response the book has had, and I'm so happy that it's resonated with people.
As you should be.
Emma, can I take a couple steps back and ask for you to share it with our listeners? How did your relationship to witchcraft come to be? How did you start to see yourself as a part of this history and not just kind of an observer of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually started sort of well before my academic career ever came to fruition. It was definitely something, a figure I came across sort of in stories and in, the Disney films that we grew up with, and encountering her in that way. But then constantly being drawn to her. It's almost like that queer tendency to side with the villain in the film, and like wanting, Jafar in Aladdin to succeed, because you're like, you know what, you deserve it, overthrow it.
He reminds me of me, and so therefore I want him to win the day. And that's what they did wrong by queer coding all of these villains, because now all the queer people are like, me and Ursula are the same, actually.
Yeah, and I will be her as a drag king at my next showcase. Yes.
There you go.
I love that. Oh, that's so amazing. But also, like, that brings a lot of confusion as a young person when all of your friends are rooting for the princesses, and you're sort of, leaning towards, the sort of more dark or sort of evil characters. And when I came across, I think it was an ethnography of witchcraft when I was a teenager. I think it was an anthropologist. I started reading her book, and I was like, oh, people can just call themselves witches? Well, I want to do that. And so for a really long time through my early sort of school and high school years, the witch was an identity as well as a practice, but it was an identity first. It was sort of a protective shield between me and the predominantly white community that I was raised in. It was an othering that I chose, not an othering that was prescribed to me on the basis of my appearance or the lunch that I brought to school. Mm-hmm. And so moving into my academic sort of phase, I'm still in that phase. It's not a phase, Mom.
I was born this way, Mom. I can't choose it.
I asked my parents, they were visiting recently. I was like, do you know that I knew when I was queer? Do you know that I actually know that the exact point? My mom sort of looked at me, and so you obviously know who my partner is, and I'm queer, and that doesn't erase that. And she was like, what was the point? And I was like, oh, it was the movie Bring It On, the cheerleader one.
Yep, that'll do it. That'll do it.
And she was like, what? I tried to stop you watching Buffy, and you would sneak around behind our back watching it, but it was Bring It On, just a commercial film that all your friends were watching. And I was like, yep, yep, it was the cheerleaders, Mum.
It's the Buffy crossover. That's what the thing is. It's the Buffy crossover.
Oh my God. Thank you for making that connection. I did not even realize. I
of course.
Didn't even make that leap. That is incredible.
Listen, I'm already 3 steps ahead because I'm thinking of techno witches. I'm thinking of Willow. I'm thinking of Buffy. I'm thinking of Bring It On.
Bam.
I love it.
I'm going to actually need a beat to just think a little bit about Bring It On, and also my personal queer awakening, which has been at like Beckham. So I think this is a great time for us to just take a quick little breather, grab a refill in the kitchen, and be right back.
Hey, it's Julia, and welcome to The Refill. First things first, before we get started, did you know that our sale on Patreon is still running? You can get 50% off your annual membership at patreon.com/spiritspodcast, running until August 15th. So if you want to check out the cool rewards we have, like recipe cards, ad-free episodes, bonus Urban Legends episodes each and every month, check that out at patreon.com/spiritspodcast. And you can join the ranks of our newest patrons like Acton, Joanna, Melissa, Howl of Minerva, Selena, Ludmilla, Sydney, Sarah, Sigrid, Janine, Pingvo, and Fenrir. And of course, thank you to our supporting producer level patrons, Alicia, Hannah, Scott, Anne, Matthew, Lil, and Will. And of course, our legend level patrons, Captain Jonathan Malachi Cosmos, Audra, Sarah, Beam Me Up Scotty, Morgan, Rico Like Chibi Yokai, and Smoliv. And hey, do you have 5 minutes to help us grow our show, sell more ads, and reach more listeners? Head over to multitudeshows.com/survey to take Multitude's annual listener survey. It takes just 5 minutes and it helps us out tremendously. We always try to bring you consistent episodes, high-quality ads, relevant social media content, helpful emails, and this survey is how we figure out who you are, what you're looking for, and how we can help you. Plus, every survey ends with a collage of Multitude pet pics. There are some really cute new additions this year, so you should definitely go check that out. So please, take a couple minutes, help us out. Go to multitudeshows.com/survey now. That's multitudeshows.com/survey. And now, let's get back to the show. We are back, and Emma, one of the things that we love to ask our guests is, what have you been drinking lately? Whether that is cocktails, mocktails, coffee creations, what have you. What has been your drink of choice?
So my favorite drink of choice in the morning is a spicy ginger chai.
Ooh. Let's go.
Yes.
Really ginger and pepper forward. So really not using like clove and sort of the sweeter honey notes, but like a really like savory ginger pepper chai.
Ooh, I need to try that now because I think that's one of the reasons why I bounce off of chai sometimes. It's a little too on the like sweet honey side. And I think I just need it a little like spicier. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
No problem.
This weekend, I'm going to pick up some organic ginger from the health food store to grow ginger this year. Here in North America, we're getting into our seed starting, spring season. And Julia, you will be my first recipient of that ginger crop.
Yeah, I did it.
I love that.
Emma, one of the things that I really liked about the book was you talk about, and this really like tickled something in me about like my past growing up in the 90s, but also the sort of like American idea of the housewife, but the idea of the sort of witchy Tupperware party. Can you talk a little bit more about that for the audience?
Absolutely. As you know, in the book, I'm not just doing sort of a media or discourse analysis of contemporary witchcraft. I did research with witches. It was very fieldwork based. Part of that is, you'd sort of interviews and things, but it was also just largely hanging out with people, just doing their sort of everyday life things, whether that was Dungeons and Dragons on the weekend or in some cases going along to parties and witchy sort of semi-public events, And one of those was a red tent gathering. So speaking of mythology, sort of a very broad brushstroke for the red tent is a biblical story restoried where women can convalesce, rest during their menstruation, and where young girls who are not bleeding can learn about the process from their older cousins and family and friends who are, and also hear the stories of wisdom from crones who are no longer bleeding, essentially making something that is taboo in our society, something to be hidden, treated as, sort of a time of pain to sort of just, have some painkillers and push through. Instead, it was a time of rest and reflection, and it was actually something quite sacred. And they didn't do any sort of housework, so it was very tied up in labor. And this is a mythology that really animated one of the witches, Willow, that I worked with. And she invited me to a red tent gathering she hosted at her family home. And it was incredible, being brought in and meeting her partner and her kids and meeting these other women who were also, interested in sort of similar ideas around making these processes sacred or treating them as sacred, connecting to the moon, to our cycles. And it was such a lovely evening. And then sort of 3/4 of the way through, she trots out with a basket and it's filled with all of these essential oils. And we were sitting around a fireplace and we were all sort of sinking in and just smelling the smoke and talking to each other and opening up, for some of us about some, trauma and things we'd been through in our lives and things we wanted to let go of. And she started handing out these little bottles of doTERRA oils, which
somehow the MLM in the pyramid shape that it is like a arrow or a phallus just messing up the sweet connection that we had in the vulva-like red tent.
It's
okay?
Just the imagery of, oh my God, let me talk to you. Like, let me open up to you. Let me tell you about the trauma.
Stored
like
in my body.
I'm feeling community. And then someone goes, it's really great for that lavender essential oil. And you're like, no, wait, you're ruining it.
I know, man. Not to beat you on the nose, but it broke the spell for me.
Yeah.
It broke the spell of the emotional and effective atmosphere that was created. And we were all encouraged to sort of dab them on and think about an intention. And so later, as I was, sort of analyzing my field notes and writing things up for the book, what it had reminded me of was the 90s Tupperware parties.
Yep.
A weirdly universal experience. Absolutely every single person I have spoken to went, oh yeah, my mum had one of those. Oh yes, my mum hosted those. My mum had a lingerie party. They're all tapping into, the product changes, but what they're tapping into is a 80s marketing technique that Tupperware introduced because they were not making good sales. Everyone was using glass containers, which we have moved back to because they're so much better.
It all comes back around.
Which I'm glad about.
And all these women are like, why would I use Tupperware to take, like, I can use the glass and then I can put the glass in the oven and I can heat it up. They had to change their marketing strategy because it just wasn't working. And what they tapped into was housewives and mums' intimate networks. And so they would host the party, give them all the products, have everyone invited over to the houses, and they would use those spaces and that emotional labor in order to sell the products. And bam, Tupperware became a household name. Like some fucking Mad Men episode.
Let me ask the wife.
Just someone in a boardroom smoking a cigarette went, Tupperware parties.
The old lady at home said, this'll work.
It's also just so funny because, again, like talking about sort of my own experiences and like what you see online, circling back to what we were talking about when we first started the episode. But this idea, too, of the transition, the sort of like MLM, Mary Kay essential oils situation is now getting really into, and I don't mean this in the derogatory way, but like the sort of like woo-woo witchy era now, in the way that it is like, I don't know if you've actually had a spiritual awakening or if this is just like the next scam that you are on, but it is really interesting to see that transition happening. A coworker of ours shared a influencer the other day. It must have like popped up as an Instagram ad or something, where there was a woman on here. I'm not going to shout out her actual like Instagram account because I don't want her to have those follows. But there is a post where it says, I was a toxic Connecticut hedge fund wife when I discovered my soul mission as a clairvoyant exorcist. But I can pivot. And I'm like, oh boy, there's a lot of like just business speak happening in there that is like being transported through the prism of actual spirituality conversation. And I think that's fascinating.
Totally. The eclectic spiritual extractivism.
Yes, exactly. She uses the phrase at one point, galactic parasite. And I'm like, I can't even figure out what you're pulling from to get this kind of language. It's absolutely wild. And I think there's like a certain amount of like, your belief system is your belief system. There is not a particular hierarchy in the way that there is with other religions when it comes to practicing witchcraft. But a lot of these accounts, it reminds me of what I used to hear people call cafeteria Catholics, where it's like you just kind of pick and choose what you like, and then that's what your belief system is, and that's not necessarily the case. This feels even more so of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's that picking and choosing is the eclectic part, right? But it's not an eclecticism in terms of I'm trying to build a spiritual practice that's outside of sort of institutional religions who I don't agree with their levels of exploitation and corruption and child abuse. No, this is just extractivism wearing feathers and burning white sage.
We have come from the history of these like light and love. Largely, I think in the US, we have an image of witches as white, middle class, affluent, thin, able-bodied women. In many cases, folks who are otherwise, I would say, embraced by society and perhaps leaning into parts of them that they, a difference or a feeling of oppression from the system that I imagine they couldn't articulate in other ways, or maybe this was the method that they choose. And I think it's no accident, Emma, that you draw largely from Black and queer theorists in your kind of framework of understanding feminism, understanding witchcraft, understanding, how to queer the past and the present. So I'm curious, as we sort of look at modern day TikTok witches on Etsy, witches on Instagram.
Our techno witches.
Techno witches, indeed. One of, to me, my favorite lines from the book is, right now the world needs witchy feminists. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how to be a witchy feminist in a way that welcomes in and advocates for historically oppressed folks and historically excluded folks, and not kind of turning maybe a previous identity marked by rejection into a method of rejecting, co-opting, or silencing others.
Witch Power for me is the book I wrote because I couldn't find it on the shelf, right? So I'd been, over the years consuming books written by witches, written by academics about witches, and they are largely put out into the world by privileged white voices. It is quite hard to find Black, BIPOC, queer perspectives. They're sort of few and far between. It's hard to find those that have that sort of social theory analytic lens. So I wrote the book for my 14, 15-year-old self, that if she had found it on the shelf, she would have thought, oh my God, I'm not the only one. I have a place, sort of in this world. Coming back to your question, whether that's the academic or the witch sort of identity, it's that proximity to whiteness that protects. So sort of that vision that you mentioned around the sort of middle-class white woman, sort of finding that she's still protected, right, in doing that exploration because of her proximity to whiteness and to straightness. It is far more risky for Black and brown and for queer and for trans folk exploring these spiritualities, the social, physical, spiritual, emotional harms that can come from entering into these practices or identifying as doing this type of work. It's higher, and it's real. I've definitely been, ridiculed in the academy for what I do and what I focus on and who I research. But that's part of the risk that I'm willing to absorb, because as part of my practice as a witchy feminist is to carve out a space for the people who want to do this work. And now I'm starting to, which is incredible and still blows my mind, I'm seeing young academics, starting their PhDs or coming into, sort of their early career stage, reaching out to me and saying, I read your book and oh my God, I don't feel alone. There's someone else who thinks like this.
Yes.
And that's incredible. But I did that in the way that's part of my practice is through writing. So if you're an artist, if you're a documentary filmmaker, if you're a musician, in whatever way, shape or form, keep doing that practice and make sure you're connecting to and platforming queer and Black folk in whatever shape, way or form that is in your particular space. And trying to do that in a way that's authentic, that's not tokenistic, and that's in conversation and ongoing. Be open to feedback, because you're going to get it wrong. You're going to make mistakes. But that's so much better than not doing anything at all.
So well put.
Dang. Yeah.
One of the ways, Emma, that I appreciated you and felt you carving out space for a person I didn't know, but one I can imagine now of younger you, is through autoethnography, which is a practice and a tool that is new to me. I would love to know, which I would say at first, like my maybe assumption of scholarly work is that it doesn't have the first person. It doesn't have opinions. It doesn't have, texture or, I don't know, anything I would think of as like not objective. But obviously the field of ethnography or of anthropology is about being among people, of which like you are one. So can you tell us what autoethnography is and why it was important to you to bring your personal perspective, the witch, the scholar, the anthropologist, to bear in this book?
starting as like a young academic when I first discovered anthropology, I knew immediately I wanted to throw objectivity or this illusion of a neutral, objective, armchair academic out the window. It's demonstrably false, creates really severe hierarchies of knowledge, pits East against West. It's not how I wanted to do things. And it was obviously what I encountered really early on when learning the anthropological canon, because it was really pivotal in creating those hierarchies of knowledge. Of, the sort of European anthropologist going over and doing 2 years of field work with the exotic other, writing up the ethnography and the field work, presenting it to the academic world and saying, look what I have written and discovered about these people. Aren't I amazing? The sort of masculine hero anthropologist, never mind his wife who went along with him and wrote up all of his field notes and cooked his dinners and helped introduce him to the locals and create those connections and did all of that care work and labor that ended up being a fucking footnote at the start of the book.
If she's lucky.
Yeah. No citations. No, you don't need that. No, I was very lucky to be raised by some incredibly fierce feminist queer academics in my early days. So,
oh my God, you are second generation queer academic. That's so good.
That's so cool.
So it's incredibly formative, right? And now, it's almost like being in a drag family. Now I get to do that with my PhD students and research assistants, being like, yes, come with me. We can do it differently.
Hell yeah.
Oh my God. Why don't academics have like the drag house family names? Like, don't let your institution get glory on your behalf. Like, you should be, the scholar daughter, the drag daughter of the person that you are. And then we can also have the kind of like coaching trees of academic thought and reference laid more, obviously for folks outside of the academy.
Yeah. See, there's other ways of doing things. There are different ways. Exactly. And this is why I draw on autoethnography, because it does flip that script and that narrative of the invisible, objective narrator of the community. Instead, the book and the perspective of the autoethnographer, it put you in my shoes and forced you to sit with the tensions and the discomfort and the achievement. So it I'm hoping, put you on that roller coaster of emotions. But also, you said the word texture. I think of myself as a very sensory ethnographer, and I try to make sure that comes through the vignettes that I write up. It's so incredibly important to me because anthropologists and ethnographers are storytellers, and how we tell stories and from what perspective we tell those stories is politically significant. It's not accidental, and it has so much importance and impact on the world and the communities that we research. I didn't write this book up immediately after I published my thesis. It took time sitting with those interviews and being able to take that sort of critical step back and to talk about this community that I love so dearly. I have so much respect for. I am a part of, but that loving and that respect also requires that critical eye and touch. And am I the right person to do this? So the journey, I hope, was captured in that book, the sensory and the emotional.
I think it absolutely was. I want to give you your flowers, your laurels as you deserve. I think it absolutely was, for sure. I have one last question for you, mainly because I think it's fascinating how much of this research was, in fact, field work and field research that you were doing. You've already shared a couple of very interesting stories from that experience, but was there a instance in your field work that really either surprised you or the experience wasn't what you were expecting going into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it was Chapter 1, the Catching Clouds that I lead with, was attending the witch camp, the sort of magical intensive with the reclaiming tradition going along and, really just throwing myself into a group of strangers and hoping that they embrace me as a fellow practitioner, but also a researcher who they didn't know. I was surprised with how quickly I was welcomed and embraced into that community. In hindsight, not surprised because I was this little baby queer finding her way in the world. And they were immediately like, oh, yes, come here, babe.
A fresh one.
And for me, there was a moment during that witch camp where it was, I think, the third night we were finally able to practice our evening ritual outside because it had stopped raining. We weren't sort of inside, and that being inside to me felt contrived. Like it didn't feel like we were doing it for real, right? Like we weren't in nature. Whereas that last night, there's a huge bonfire, a full moon. We're surrounded by trees on the side of this mountain, and I felt the switch, like that shift, like in the ritual. I felt this shift from I'm observing, I'm going to remember this to write down in my field notes later, and I'll be writing it up into the chapter like this. That brain switched off and my witchy embodied and placed self switched on as I was sliding around in the mud with my fellow ritual performers. Our group was invited to sort of open the ritual, and that moment for me will always be the highest point of the fieldwork.
That's such an amazing experience, and something that anyone who picks up the book can read in that first chapter.
Will you please tell our audience, Emma, where they can follow you and your work online? There will, of course, be links to everything in the description, as well as a link to buy Witch Power at an independent bookstore near you.
I am on Instagram. Please come and find me and chat to me. The book is available online. Please don't buy it through Amazon if you can avoid it. My first preference is if you have an independent local bookstore near you, please go and ask them to order a copy for you and a couple of copies for the bookstore. Otherwise, any other independent bookstore.
We're big fans of bookshop.org here at Spirits, and you can get any of your independent local booksellers through there, or support another one that you can't go to physically. So we will make sure to share the bookshop.org link for the book.
Fabulous.
Folks, next time you are looking up at the stars and feel yourself, your scholar self and your witch self separate and merge and then say, whoa, I'm allowed to do autoethnography. Remember,
stay creepy.
Stay cool.
Later, Saters.